Hi, awesome students. It's good to see you again. Today, for ninth grade, we're going to go over one of our short stories, and it's by Ray Bradbury, and it's called There Will Come Soft Rain. Now, it's a science fiction story, very similar in the sense to the other pieces. And you know what science fiction is? It's when the authors are exploring science and technology and sort of like an imagined future with an imagined context. But they're not just looking at technology and science just to look at it. Instead, they're looking at it and they're saying something about society. They're saying something about humanity or politics or the government or whatever the case may be. So it's not just for let's see what's going on in the future, but rather it's meant to tell us something about our present by investigating the possible future. So without further ado, let's open up our books and take a look at it. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And so here's my screen. It's called There Will Come Soft Rains, but let's scroll up a little bit higher here. And we're seeing that's by Ray Bradbury. We talked about science fiction already. The setting, which is within a smart house. If you haven't read it all over, make sure you read it probably before even you watch this video. Make sure you read it. So it's kind of like a smart house. It does everything for the people who live in there. Think of it like a Tony Stark Iron Man house, if you will. And the setting is 2026, which isn't far from now. But when Ray Bradbury wrote it, he wrote it in 1950. So he wrote it 76 years ago, which is a tremendous amount of time. Now, when we think about science fiction, we got to look at the context here. And the context, if we take a look over here on this left-hand side, where it talks about the building background, this is at first, technology, more specifically electrically powered machines, were only in the workplaces. Right? Think about factories and stuff like that. It wasn't until the early 1900s, specifically 1901, when a variety of smaller scale electrical machines started entering the home life. And this build background talks about the washing machines, the vacuum cleaner, the toaster in 1901, 1907, 1909, respectively. And so people became comfortable with technology, comfortable with machines, if you will. And there was this vision that they would help us out in a lot of ways and give us a lot more free time. So a lot of science fiction back then talked about that. But later on, science fiction, if you take a look over here, it's going to probe, as it says, the idea more deeply about technology. And it became apparent that technological advancements didn't necessarily guarantee social progress. So remember, there's a difference between technological progress versus social progress. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So let's move over here to There Will Come Soft Rains. And I'm going to give you sort of a broad overview, and we'll analyze it just a little bit here. But there's only so much we can do in about 10 minutes. So if you notice, the story begins with tick-tock, 7 o'clock, right? So time, it begins with time. And as you know, throughout the story, time keeps coming up again and again and again. So we see 7 o'clock, and then at 7:09, breakfast is made, right? And then it announced the date. And then down here, 8:01, you get my point, 8:30, so 9:15. So the time is mentioned again and again, and that's important. So keep that in mind. Now, if you look here, when breakfast is made at 7:09, we know that there's 4 people living there. They cooked 8 pieces of toast, 8 eggs, 16 slices of bacon. It's a lot of bacon for 4 people. 2 coffees and 2 milks, and that's that 4 where we're sort of getting that number. And then importantly, it says today's August 4th, 2026. Right? So again, 76 years in the future for Bradbury, only 6 for us. Now, we continue on here, and we notice here that at 8:30, the eggs and the toast and the bacon and presumably the drinks have not been eaten, have not been drank either. And so they've been scraped and thrown into the garbage here. So that's an issue. And then later on at 10:15, we move from inside the house to outside the house. And what happens is that the sprinklers go on and so on and so forth. But then it starts describing the house itself. Let's read this section on page 88. It says, the garden sprinklers whirled up in golden founts, filling the soft morning air with scatterings of brightness. The water pelted window panes, running down the charred west side where the house had been burned, evenly free of its white paint. The entire west face of the house was black, save for 5 places. Here, the silhouette and paint of a man mowing the lawn. Here, as in a photograph, a woman bent to pick flowers. Still farther over, their images burned on wood. In one titanic instant, a small boy, hands flung into the air. Higher up, the image of a thrown ball. And opposite him, a girl, hands raised to catch a ball which never came down. So the 5 spots of paint, the man, the woman, the children, the ball remained. The rest was a thin charcoal layer. So if you take a look at my background, it's deliberately chosen, and it is the picture of the image here that he's described. And you'll see over here, this is the man mowing the lawn, right? Above my head is the woman doing the gardening, right? Doing the flowering. And then the 2 people on this side here, that's the child, the 2 children, and then the ball is right in the middle there. And if you notice, it's just a silhouette or an outline of them. And everything else around them is burned, but they still remain an image in white paint. So the question is why? Well, you've read the story already, and so you already know what has happened here. Some sort of holocaust, so to speak, has taken place where there's some sort of bomb that went off, an atomic or a nuclear bomb, and the heat that was generated was so intense that the people were incinerated. The only thing that was left was what was behind them, and behind them, of course, was the white paint. And everything else around was just burned to a charcoal color here. So they're gone. They're completely incinerated, and all that remains is the outline of their last movements. And the heat was so intense, the bomb that went off was so quick that, remember, the ball literally, see, here's the picture, the ball is still in the air. So it happened like that, so that the ball was incinerated in the air too, and its image was burned into the back or the side of the house here. So let's continue on with our story. Let me bring it up again. So what happens throughout it is a variety of activities take place within the house, ranging from lights going on and off, and sounds and music playing, and then eventually a dog comes in, but then it's died, and then it's taken away. And then finally, and if you notice, look at the time, it goes real quick, 12 o'clock, 2:15, 2:35, right? 4:30, right? 5 o'clock, 6, 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, right? And so at 9:05, it calls out, it's over here, right-hand side here, calls out, says, Mrs. McClellan, which poem would you like this evening? Well, she's dead. She's one of the images, if you look behind me, one of the images burned into the side of the building. She doesn't respond, and so the computer randomly chooses a poem to read aloud for her, because apparently this is what she would do. She would listen to a poem or read some music at night here. So I'm going to read it aloud to you. Now, the poem is called There Will Come Soft Rain. So the story is named after the poem, and it's written by Sarah Teasdale. But I'm going to read it aloud to you because that's the heart of the story's thematic idea here, right? So let's continue on here. It says right here, it says, there will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the ponds singing at night, wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. So this is a well-known poem, in part because, of course, Bradbury used it. It's got a lot of really obvious and effective poetic elements. Alliteration jumps to mind. There's a variety of rhyme that takes place, personification, some other solid aspects of imagery. But we're not going to touch that. We're just interested in the content itself of what it says. So first of all, there's lots of description of nature, right? You got these swallows, they're circling, right? You got the frogs, singing. You have the robins with their feathers, and then they're whistling. So you have description of nature, and they're going about their day. But this middle portion of the poem is the important part. It says, not one will know. Not one. What's the one? Well, nature. Not one piece of nature will know of the war. World War III, with nuclear bombs or atomic bombs. Not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. So not one, this frog, this bird, this whatever, would know or care if we all died, right? Spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. So woke at dawn, right? What comes up at dawn? Well, the sun. So no matter how important we think we are, what's going to move on? Well, not just nature, right? But the sun's going to rise, or time is going to move on. And again, notice if you take a look at this piece, it's time all of the time throughout the piece. 4:30, right? 5 o'clock, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, 9:05. Time keeps moving on, even though all of the human beings are dead. They're all gone. In fact, if you recall, and this is what's important here, remember we say that it's August 4th to begin the story, right? We don't know how long they've been dead. They could have been dead that day, or they've been dead for days or weeks or months, or maybe even longer than that. But after fire starts, right, and the house begins to burn down, the house says again and again and again that today is August 5th. So it's the next day. And time still moves on with or without us. And that's the crux of There Will Come Soft Rains. The idea of our significance, the idea of has our technology really benefited us, or is it really causing some things that may be worse? Well, that's a decision you'll have to decide for yourself, and eventually you will with your essay near the end of the year. As always, folks, if you have any questions for me, send me an email. You know what my email address is. And make sure that you stop in and you attend the opportunity block time that's scheduled for our 9R class. I hope you're doing great. I hope everything is going well. I hope to see you on Monday. In the meantime, you take care.